The garage was silent. Too silent. Only the hiss of the air compressor punctuated the stillness, and the soft, steady hum of a luxury sports car idling somewhere near the center of the polished concrete floor. Malik knelt beside it, his hands greasy with engine oil, moving with precision, careful not to nick a single panel, adjusting components with the kind of calm control that comes from years of practice. His eyes flicked briefly to the gauges, then back to the engine. Every bolt, every wire, every piece of metal mattered. He didn't notice the black limousine rolling in at first, sleek and glinting under the fluorescent lights. It didn't seem like the type of car that would stop just anywhere. The hiss of the tires on concrete, the faint echo of the doors, it all came as a soft, almost threatening announcement. Then he saw him, Richard Whitmore, the billionaire. Late 50s, sharp suit tailored to perfection, polished shoes that clicked like a metronome with each step across the garage floor. Hair slicked back, eyes cold, scanning, calculating, predatory. Malik's body stiffened slightly, though he didn't move. He had worked in garages his entire life, seen all kinds of customers, from polite to rude, but there was something in Richard Whitmore's presence that made the air itself feel heavy, oppressive, judgmental. Richard circled the car like a hawk circling prey, eyes narrowing at every movement Malik made. "You touch my car and I swear." Richard's voice cut through the air like a whip, sharp and deliberate. Malik froze, a wrench clutched in his hand. Sweat pricked at his forehead, though the garage was cool. His hands remained steady for now, resting lightly on the tire. Every word from Richard carried a weight, a threat veiled in wealth. "Do you even know what this is worth? Do you have any respect?" He leaned closer, eyes scanning Malik from head to toe, lips curling in a sneer. Then he laughed, loud, cruel, a sound that echoed through the cavernous space, bouncing off the concrete walls. It wasn't just laughter. It was domination. It was the sound of someone who believes money makes them king, and everyone else beneath them is nothing. Malik swallowed, tried to steady his breath. "Sir, I'm just—" he started, voice careful, neutral, professional. But Richard waved him off, his hand slicing the air like he was swatting a fly. Humiliation painted every line of his face, a sharp, bright mark of superiority meant to burn. "I don't want your excuses. Don't touch anything. Don't breathe on it. Step away." He took a slow, deliberate step closer, and Malik's jaw clenched. His body wanted to retreat, but something inside him rooted him to the spot. Every nerve screamed fight or flight. Every fiber of his being wanted to run, but he stayed. A few of the garage workers peeked out from behind their tools and benches, whispering among themselves. Their eyes darted back and forth, uncomfortable, caught between fear and curiosity. Some shrugged, pretending not to see. Others looked away, unwilling to witness what was unfolding. Malik felt their eyes, but he ignored them. His jaw tightened. The humiliation wasn't just public. It was sharp, personal. He felt every ounce of it in his chest, a low, burning ache that threatened to rise into anger. And yet, he stayed. He couldn't allow the weight of someone else's wealth to push him from his dignity, not entirely. Richard's hand shot out toward the car, as if daring Malik to do anything to challenge him. The billionaire's lips curled in derision, and his eyes flicked to the onlookers, enjoying the silent performance, the display of power. He was showing them and Malik exactly who ran this world, or so he thought. The tension in the garage thickened, hanging in the air like smoke. Each second stretched, heavy and suffocating. Malik's eyes met Richard's briefly, calm, steady, unblinking. He said nothing, but his silence carried a weight of its own. A storm was brewing behind those steady eyes, a fire controlled only by discipline, patience, and the awareness that what came next would be decisive. Richard's laughter faded, but the sneer remained. "I've seen mechanics before," he said, voice lower now, venom coiled around each word. "But you're something else. Bold enough to touch what isn't yours, daring enough to pretend you know better. You think skill matters. You're nothing without permission." He tilted his head slightly, examining Malik as one might inspect an insect under a glass. The silence returned, broken only by the soft tick of the engine and the hiss of the air compressor. The world seemed to hold its breath. Malik's hands stayed poised above the tire. He didn't flinch, didn't step back. Every part of him burned with awareness. The contempt in Richard's eyes, the sneering lips, the cold certainty that money could humiliate with impunity. Yet in that stillness there was defiance, not loud, not confrontational. A quiet, controlled defiance that radiated from the very way he breathed, the way his shoulders squared, the steady gaze that met the billionaire's. It was subtle but potent. Malik wasn't going to let Richard Whitmore's wealth define him, not entirely. Richard's eyes narrowed further. He circled again, slower this time, studying Malik like he was a puzzle, a curiosity, an irritation. He paused, leaning against the polished hood of the car, arms crossed. "Do you know what it feels like to lose everything in a second?" he sneered. "Do you know what it feels like to be invisible?" Malik said nothing. He didn't need to. Every movement, every pause, every silent breath was an answer. He was visible. He existed. He mattered. The arrogance of wealth could humiliate, could threaten, could isolate, but it could not erase skill, dignity, or presence. Not yet. Richard laughed again, sharp, short, but it sounded hollow this time. Malik's eyes followed him, calm, controlled, but the storm within him churned. The camera would linger on that gaze, on the quiet tension, on the moment just before the inevitable reversal. This was more than a man and a car. This was a collision of worlds, power versus skill, arrogance versus dignity, money versus integrity. The stage was set. The first blow had landed, and no one yet knew that what was about to happen in the next few minutes would turn everything upside down, leaving the billionaire speechless and everyone else stunned. The garage seemed to shrink around them, the air thick with expectation. Malik's hands, steady despite the humiliation, brushed lightly over the engine. Every movement was precise. Every motion mattered. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet confidence stirred. He knew his skill, his knowledge, and his dignity were more than a match for Richard Whitmore's arrogance. The billionaire had made a mistake, one he would soon regret. The silence stretched. Richard's eyes flicked again to the engine, then back to Malik, searching, calculating, still unconvinced. But Malik stayed rooted, a calm presence, a quiet force waiting for the right moment to show that true power didn't come from money. It came from skill, integrity, and resilience. The first chapter of this confrontation was complete. The humiliation had landed, but it would not last, not for Malik, not in the way Richard thought. Richard left the garage laughing, a sharp, mocking sound that ricocheted off the walls, leaving a bitter echo. He climbed into his sleek black limousine as if the world itself belonged to him, the engine purring under his command. He waved at the staff who had gathered quietly in the corner, a cruel smirk tugging at his lips, the kind of smirk that reminded everyone of the invisible lines separating wealth from labor. Malik watched from under the car, his hands still gripping the wrench. They trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the heat of anger that burned deep inside him. The humiliation from minutes ago had not faded. It had settled in his chest, a low, quiet fury that demanded acknowledgement. He exhaled slowly and returned to the engine, methodical, precise, deliberate. Words spread quickly. Whispers floated through the garage like smoke. "He's just lucky to have a job here," one of the older mechanics muttered under his breath. Another laughed quietly, shaking his head, echoing Richard's derision, almost as if they were testing Malik, seeing whether he would crack under the weight of wealth's contempt. Some glanced away, pretending to focus on their own tasks, but the tension was palpable. Every eye seemed to weigh him, measure him, question his right to exist in the same space as Richard Whitmore's car. Malik ignored it all. He didn't have to respond to whispers or snickers. His focus was absolute, his hands moving with the fluid confidence of a man who had known engines longer than most had known luxury. To Malik, the car wasn't just a machine. It was a symphony of engineering, a masterpiece that spoke to his lifetime of dedication and craft. Each tire, each suspension coil, every polished engine part told a story, not just of steel and oil, but of skill, of pride, of care. He ran his fingers along the metal surfaces, listening to the faint hum of the hydraulics, feeling every vibration. And yet, despite the comfort of familiarity, Richard's shadow loomed large over him. The billionaire's sneer, his words, his condescending laughter, they lingered like smoke, invisible but suffocating. Every turn of the wrench, every adjustment, was done under the pressure of scrutiny, the threat of humiliation hanging over him like a dark cloud. The quiet fire inside him refused to be extinguished. Hours crawled by. The light shifted in the garage, the sun dipping lower, shadows stretching long across the floor. Malik's hands were smeared with grease, his shirt damp with sweat, but he remained unshaken. He had learned long ago that skill was quiet. Confidence was silent. Power didn't always roar, it sometimes waited, patient and unassuming, until the moment was right. And Malik waited. Then Richard returned. This time he was not alone. An entourage of assistants, personal aides, and a few curious onlookers trailed behind him, their eyes wide with the unspoken thrill of observing wealth in motion. He approached the car with his usual arrogance, every movement a declaration, every step a subtle assertion of dominance. "I hope nothing's been damaged," he sneered, voice carrying that same sharp edge, laced with disdain. His eyes flicked to Malik, scanning, measuring, as if daring him to say something to prove him wrong. Malik straightened slightly, wiping his hands on a rag, and looked directly at Richard. Calm, controlled, steady. "Sir, I noticed a minor leak in the hydraulic system," he said quietly. "If you like, I can fix it before it becomes serious." The words were simple, professional, delivered with the assurance of someone who knew their craft inside and out. Richard laughed, loud and dismissive, a sound meant to belittle, to assert that the world revolved around him and his judgment. "Do you even know how much this costs? Don't waste my time." He shook his head, lips curling in a smirk that dared Malik to challenge him. Malik didn't flinch. He didn't back down. He didn't respond with words. Instead, he returned to the car, moving with the same methodical precision, the same careful attention to detail as before. Every adjustment, every touch, every glance toward the gauges was a silent declaration. The billionaire might have power, but Malik had skill. The arrogance of wealth could threaten, humiliate, and dominate, but it could not erase knowledge, it could not erase experience, it could not erase dignity. Not yet. The tension thickened, coiling through the air like smoke. Every movement between the two men became a duel, not with words, but with presence. Richard's eyes followed Malik like a hawk, sharp, calculating, waiting for a mistake that might give him satisfaction. Malik's gaze was calm, unwavering, a mirror of quiet defiance. He worked slowly, deliberately, the engine responding to his touch like a symphony obeying a master conductor. There was no rush, no fear. Just focus, precision, and the kind of confidence that only comes from knowing your worth when others try to diminish it. The staff watched, silently now, tension crackling through the garage. The injustice was palpable. One man with wealth and arrogance trying to impose his will, trying to humiliate, and another standing tall, refusing to be broken. Each silent glance, each careful adjustment, each controlled breath became a story of resistance. Malik wasn't just fixing a car. He was reclaiming a moment of dignity, asserting a truth that couldn't be bought or mocked. The disparity between them, the cold, polished arrogance of Richard and the quiet, steady presence of Malik, was a story in itself. Minutes felt like hours. Richard paced slowly, his fingers brushing against the hood, still unconvinced, still searching for a flaw. Malik didn't look up, didn't react. He let the engine speak for him. Every hum, every click, every subtle adjustment was a statement. The car was no longer just a machine under scrutiny. It had become a testament to Malik's skill, his patience, his resilience. The silence between the two men was thick with tension, every second a challenge, every breath a test of endurance. And yet there was no confrontation. Malik didn't raise his voice. He didn't snap. He didn't react to the sneers, the laughter, the implied threat of humiliation. He simply worked, steady, unshakable. Richard's presence loomed, powerful and intimidating, but it was beginning to shift. The arrogance, the laughter, the contempt, they could not mask the quiet fact that this mechanic knew more about this car than the billionaire ever would. The camera would linger on Malik's hands, coated in grease, moving confidently over the engine. His eyes, calm and focused, betray the storm beneath, a mixture of anger, pride, and a silent demand for acknowledgement. Richard's entourage whispers quietly now, exchanging glances. They can feel the tension, the power dynamic quietly unraveling. Something is changing, something subtle, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. The humiliation is no longer one-sided. The quiet skill, the unshakable presence of Malik, begins to shift the energy in the room. Hours later, the engine roars more smoothly than before, the hydraulics steady and precise. Malik steps back, wipes his hands, and for a brief moment the silence in the garage is complete. Richard's eyes flicker, uncertain now. Something is happening, though he doesn't yet understand it. The roar of the engine cut through the garage like thunder. Malik stepped back slightly, wiping his hands on a rag, and felt a quiet satisfaction ripple through him. The car was no longer just running. It was alive in a way it had never been before. The hum of the engine was deeper, smoother, almost musical, every component in perfect harmony. Every adjustment he had made, every small improvement, every hidden leak fixed, it all came together now in a single, undeniable statement of skill. He had taken the machine apart, understood it piece by piece, and rebuilt it stronger, faster, and safer than before. The transformation was subtle, almost imperceptible to someone untrained, but to anyone who knew cars or talent, it was impossible to miss. Richard Whitmore's footsteps echoed in the space as he approached the car again, entourage trailing behind him like shadows. He had returned with the same arrogance, the same assumption of superiority, but something in the air had shifted. The first thing he noticed was the sound, a low, smooth purr that didn't belong to the car he remembered. He leaned closer, frowning, hand hesitating over the polished hood. His brow furrowed. Something was different. The engine's hum was almost hypnotic, precise, as if the car itself were communicating perfection. He ran his fingers across the hood, incredulous, almost afraid to touch it, as if the smooth metal might shatter under his disbelief. "Did you do this?" he stammered, voice caught between shock and suspicion. Malik looked up calmly, meeting the billionaire's gaze with a quiet, firm presence. There was no arrogance, no bitterness, only a serene confidence that radiated from him like light in the dim garage. "Yes, sir," Malik said. "I've improved the suspension and fixed a hidden hydraulic leak. Your car is safer and faster than when you brought it in." His words were simple, factual, delivered without ego, but they carried the weight of truth. Richard froze, the smirk that had once dominated his face faltering as disbelief washed over him. The silence that followed was electric. Malik's quiet control seemed to fill every corner of the room, pressing against Richard's own sense of entitlement. For the first time that day, the billionaire was unsure. He stepped back, eyes wide, struggling to reconcile the arrogance he had carried with him into the garage with the undeniable reality before him. The young mechanic, the man he had mocked, laughed at, humiliated for touching his car. This man had achieved what no amount of money could buy. Richard's carefully constructed world, built on wealth and dominance, wavered on its foundation. Workers who had been quietly observing from the edges of the garage began to murmur. A few exchanged glances, whispers rising in the soft air. "Did you see that?" one of them said, barely audible. "He actually did it." Another shook his head, mouth open in disbelief. The shift was palpable. Richard's entourage, usually impervious to such displays of skill from those they deemed beneath them, now leaned forward subtly, their own confidence shaken by what they witnessed. Malik stood tall, dignity intact, the calm eye of a storm that had begun hours earlier with nothing but silent determination. Richard's smirk had vanished entirely. His face, once a mask of superiority, was replaced with a mixture of astonishment and humility. Every moment of humiliation, every cruel word he had thrown at Malik, now turned inward, reflecting back on him. The laughter that had once echoed through the garage, meant to belittle, seemed hollow in the face of undeniable skill. He had tried to assert dominance through wealth, through ridicule, through fear, but it had failed. Malik had not needed to yell, had not needed to fight back verbally. He had simply done his job with excellence, allowing competence and integrity to speak louder than arrogance. Richard stepped back further, packing slightly, his mind racing. He could not fully process what had happened, and yet the evidence was undeniable. The car ran better, smoother, safer. The young man standing before him had accomplished something that no amount of money or influence could replicate. Richard's gaze flicked toward the other mechanics, their quiet nods, subtle smiles, and incredulous expressions amplifying the impact. It wasn't just a car that had been fixed. A narrative had been flipped. The underdog, dismissed, humiliated, overlooked, had risen, not through confrontation, but through skill, patience, and determination. Malik, still calm, continued to adjust the final components with the same precision and care. Each motion deliberate, each glance measured. He knew the power of silence, the weight of competence, and he wielded both like a weapon sharper than any insult. Richard tried to speak, to regain control, but the words faltered, lost somewhere between disbelief and the dawning recognition that he had misjudged the young mechanic entirely. Every insult, every scornful glance, every attempt to belittle, now meaningless in the face of truth. The garage itself seemed to shift. The hum of the engine filled the space with a kind of reverence. Even the air felt charged with change. What had begun as a simple confrontation between a billionaire and a mechanic had transformed into something larger, something moral and profound. The audience could feel it, the weight of injustice meeting quiet resilience, arrogance meeting dignity, and power meeting integrity. Malik was no longer just a mechanic. He had become a symbol of perseverance, of the quiet, unstoppable force of skill and respect. Richard's voice finally found itself shaky, almost inaudible. I underestimated you, he said, the words tasting foreign on his tongue. Malik met his gaze, still calm, still unwavering. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. His dignity, quiet and unassailable, was its own reward. Richard's eyes lingered on him, searching for any trace of arrogance, of smugness, but found none. Only a man standing tall, unbroken, unbent, and unbowed. The realization hit the billionaire fully then. Power without respect, wealth without humility, status without integrity. None of it meant anything when confronted by true talent and steadfast character. Other workers began to step forward, subtle nods, small claps, whispers of admiration. The shift was complete. The room, once thick with tension and humiliation, now held a quiet reverence. Malik had flipped the narrative without raising his voice, without arrogance, without confrontation. He had let his skill and integrity do the talking. Richard, humbled and introspective, took a tentative step back, the weight of the lessons settling upon him. The billionaire who had mocked, sneered, and humiliated was now speechless, stripped of the power he had so confidently wielded. Malik straightened fully, letting the rag fall to the floor. He didn't gloat. He didn't invite praise. He simply existed. The garage was quiet now, the tension that had gripped every corner slowly dissolving into a still, reflective calm. Richard Whitmore stood frozen for a moment, the weight of disbelief and realization pressing down on him like a physical force. His hand hovered over the polished hood of his car, trembling slightly as he tried to reconcile the arrogance he had carried into this space with the truth he now faced. Every insult, every mocking glance, every dismissive word he had thrown at Malik seemed to echo back at him, empty and meaningless against the undeniable skill, patience, and dignity of the young mechanic. The power he had wielded with confidence moments ago now felt hollow, fleeting, irrelevant. Finally, Richard spoke, his voice quiet, almost fragile, tinged with awe. I underestimated you, he admitted, and the words hung in the air like a confession long overdue. Malik looked up at him, calm and unwavering, professionalism etched into every line of his posture. He didn't smile, didn't offer congratulations, didn't allow a flicker of pride to seep into his tone. Respect is earned, sir, he said softly, each word measured, deliberate, carrying a weight far beyond the garage walls. The simplicity of the statement cut through Richard's arrogance more sharply than any confrontation could have. Richard paused, swallowing hard, absorbing the lesson that had arrived not as a lecture, but as an undeniable truth. This moment was larger than the car, larger than the garage, larger than the humiliation and power plays that had dominated the morning. It was about recognizing value beyond wealth, about seeing people for their talent and integrity rather than dismissing them for their station or appearance. Richard's mind raced as he replayed every interaction with Malik, every assumption he had made, every time he had tried to assert dominance with fear and money. Each one now appeared small, shallow, irrelevant in the face of a man who had proven that skill, patience, and moral strength could not be bought or belittled. Around them, the garage workers began to exhale, subtly at first, then with more visible relief and admiration. They had witnessed a reversal of power that was not loud or violent, but undeniable. Malik had not shouted, had not challenged Richard with anger. He had simply done his work with care, precision, and integrity, letting his competence speak for itself. Every glance, every silent motion, every controlled breath had contributed to this victory, a quiet, unstoppable force of skill and character. Some mechanics nodded to themselves, others whispered quietly, their respect for Malik evident in their eyes and gestures. They had watched a lesson in humility and dignity unfold before them, one that money alone could never teach. Richard finally straightened, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly, replaced by a thoughtful, almost reflective posture. He looked around the garage, at the other mechanics, the tools, the cars, and finally back at Malik. The arrogance that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a dawning recognition that true power is not in wealth, not in status, not in the ability to humiliate others. It is in respect, acknowledgement, and the capacity to see value where others might not. Richard had come here to assert dominance, to reinforce his superiority, but he was leaving with something far more valuable, a lesson in humanity. Malik returned to his workbench, picking up a clean rag and wiping his hands, calm, collected, yet quietly victorious. The grease on his hands and the marks on his shirt were badges of honor, not shame. He didn't gloat, didn't boast, didn't allow the shift in power to inflate his ego. Instead, he remained steady, focused, and professional, embodying the quiet dignity that had guided him through every moment of this ordeal. Around him, the atmosphere of the garage had transformed. What had been tension and humiliation had shifted into respect, reflection, and understanding. Every worker present had learned something that could not be taught in words alone. That skill, integrity, and calm determination could command a room more powerfully than wealth ever could. Richard's entourage, once confident in their observation of wealth and power, now moved quietly, subdued. They had seen the billionaire humbled, not by accident, not by force, but by the undeniable talent and quiet resilience of someone they had underestimated. Their whispers were softer, tinged with awe and reflection, and some of them exchanged glances that acknowledged a lesson far deeper than car maintenance or mechanics. It was about justice, respect, and the quiet dignity that comes from standing firm in the face of arrogance and contempt. The billionaire took a final step back, gaze lingering on Malik. "I see it now," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. The recognition was profound, almost painful in its clarity. He had carried the arrogance of privilege into this space, expecting compliance, obedience, and submission. He had expected laughter at his mockery, nods at his superiority, fear at his wealth. Instead, he had met skill, calm, and integrity, and it had left him speechless, humbled, and thoughtful. For Richard Whitmore, this was more than a lesson in cars or mechanics. It was a lesson in life, in leadership, in the power of respect and recognition over dominance and wealth. Malik, meanwhile, continued his work, adjusting tools, checking components, his movements precise, measured, unhurried. He did not allow the shift in power to distract him, for he understood that victory is not in spectacle but in competence and character. The room, once dominated by the tension of humiliation and the weight of arrogance, now carried a quiet reverence. Every glance, every subtle nod, every soft exhale of admiration was a recognition of the truth Malik had embodied. That integrity and skills speak louder than status and money, and that dignity cannot be taken. It is something one carries within themselves, quietly, persistently, until it is acknowledged. Richard turned toward the exit finally, the weight of the lesson settling on his shoulders. There was no smirk, no laughter, no attempt to regain the superiority that had been his shield all morning. He walked away, thoughtful, humbled, a man transformed not by confrontation, not by punishment, but by witnessing the quiet mastery and unwavering dignity of another human being. The garage itself remained unchanged physically, but everything inside it had shifted. The balance of power had been corrected, not with anger or revenge, but with competence, patience, and integrity. As Malik watched him leave, a sense of quiet triumph filled the space. It was not a boastful victory, not a public spectacle, but a personal, profound confirmation of his worth and skill. The workers around him absorbed the lesson too, inspired by his resilience and calm. In that garage, amidst the tools, the grease, the engines, a universal truth had been demonstrated. Humiliation cannot defeat talent, arrogance cannot suppress skill, and integrity always prevails. The moral was clear, resonating in every corner of the room. True power is measured not by money, status, or fear, but by respect, acknowledgement, and the dignity with which one treats others. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. The engines hummed quietly, the air compressor hissed softly, and the garage breathed with a sense of completion, of lessons learned and truths revealed. Malik returned fully to his work, calm and unshaken, the embodiment of skill, patience, and quiet power. Richard had walked away transformed, humbled, his perspective altered forever. And in the stillness that followed, One simple, undeniable truth lingered in the air. No amount of wealth or authority can outmatch integrity, talent, and the quiet strength of a person who knows their worth. The garage was physically unchanged, but the energy within it had shifted permanently. Every worker, every observer, every whisper of air carried the lesson forward. That respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned. That dignity is inherent, but its recognition can transform the highest and lowest alike, and that the true measure of power is not in what one owns, but in how one honors the abilities and humanity of others. Malik had proven it, and Richard Whitmore had learned it in the hum of an engine, the steady hands of a mechanic, and the quiet, unyielding presence of a man who refused to be diminished. The story, though concluded in action, left a lingering truth with the audience. Humility, skill, and integrity triumph, and no mockery or wealth can ever change that fundamental law of humanity.